You wake to screaming, not your own, someone else's, somewhere down the line of carts that stretches behind you like a serpent made of wood and suffering. You've learned not to turn toward the sound. In the 3 weeks since you left everything you knew, you've learned that curiosity only adds weight to what you already carry. The ropes have worn grooves into your wrists. They match the grooves being carved into your soul. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Genuinely amazes me how a story from 800 years ago can connect us across every continent, every culture. Hit that like button if you're ready for the truth they don't teach in textbooks. Your name is Aisha. Was Aisha? You're not sure anymore what tense to use when thinking about yourself. 16 years old, daughter of a calligrapher in Nishapur, a city that no longer exists in any form your mother would recognize. 4 weeks ago, you were holding an ink brush, learning the curve of Persian script under your father's patient guidance. He had steady hands, the kind that could make beauty from nothing but crushed minerals and water. Those hands are gone now. Everything is gone now, except you. And the 2,000 other women in this caravan moving east across land that seems to have no end. This is the year 1221. The Mongol Empire has just unleashed something upon the world that history will spend 8 centuries trying to understand. Not a conquest. Conquests had happened before. Not even genocide. Genocations, terrible as they were, left survivors who could rebuild. What Genghis Khan engineered was something far more insidious, far more permanent. He built a machine designed not to destroy peoples, but to unmake them from within. To erase them so thoroughly that their own descendants wouldn't know what had been stolen. And the most terrifying revelation, that machine's results are measurable today. In your DNA, in the genetic code of roughly 16 million men currently alive on this planet. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because to understand how one man's strategy rewrote human genetics across 2 continents, you first need to understand what happened to Aisha and the thousands like her whose names were deliberately erased from every record, every archive, every chronicle written by the victors. The cart stops. It's been moving for so long that the sudden stillness feels violent. Aisha's body continues to sway with phantom motion, like a sailor returning to land. Around her, women begin to whisper in a dozen languages she doesn't speak. Persian, Arabic, Turkic, Chinese. A Tower of Babel built from survivors. Someone near the front shouts, a woman's voice giving commands in Mongolian's Dish. Has started to recognize the cadence of that language, though she refuses to learn the words. Learning feels like surrendering. They're sorting them again. This has happened 3 times since leaving Nishapur. Women pulled from carts, examined, reassigned. The first time, Aisha watched an older woman, maybe 40, maybe older. It's hard to tell after weeks of starvation, get separated from her daughter. The daughter screamed in a language Aisha didn't know, but grief requires no translation. They dragged the mother toward a different group, the group that didn't get back into carts. Aisha never saw what happened to them, but she learned to read absences. Some questions answer themselves through silence. A Mongol administrator approaches. Not a soldier. Aisha has learned to distinguish roles. Soldiers wear leather and steel and carry violence in their posture. Administrators wear silken fur and carry tablets. Both are terrifying, but in different ways. Violence you can see coming. Bureaucracy wraps around you before you realize you're trapped. The woman, because many of the administrators are women. Mongol women who speak multiple languages and wield authority without apologist, tops at Aisha's cart. She looks at the mark on Aisha's wrist, a symbol Aisha still doesn't understand. Then she does something unexpected. She speaks in broken Persian. You read. Right? Aisha hesitates. This feels like a trap. Every question since the conquest has been a trap. But the woman is waiting, and not answering is also an answer. Aisha nods. The administrator makes a mark on her tablet, a different symbol. Then she moves to the next cart without another word. Aisha doesn't know what she just agreed to, what category she just entered, what future she just sealed. All she knows is that literacy, the gift her father spent years teaching her, has become something else entirely. Not liberation, currency. What Aisha doesn't know yet is that her life was saved 3 weeks ago by 3 factors recorded on a scroll. Age, 16. Skills, literate. Physical condition, viable. In the Mongol system, these aren't descriptions, they're commodity grades. And Genghis Khan, now 73 years old and conducting his final campaign, had spent 50 years perfecting the most efficient system for categorizing, transporting, and redistributing human beings the world had ever seen. But let's step back. Because Genghis Khan didn't build this machine from pure sadism. He built it from experience, from a lesson learned when he was 16 years old, the same age Aisha is now. The year was 1179. His name then was Temujin, and the woman he loved, Bert, his betrothed since childhood, had just been kidnapped by a rival tribe called the Merkits. It was revenge. Temujin's father had once stolen Bert's mother from the Merkits. Now they were balancing the equation with his wife. He spent 8 months searching. 8 months during which every night brought visions he couldn't escape. Bert, alive but violated. Bert, carrying another man's child. Bert, erased from herself. When he finally rescued her, and he did, leading a desperate raid that cost him half his warriors, she was pregnant. The child, Joki, would be raised as Temujin's son. But the question would never fully disappear. Whose blood? Whose legacy? Temujin never spoke of it publicly, but he carried the lesson like a scar that never healed. Conquer with swords, and you rule for a generation. Conquer with bloodlines, and you rule forever. Standing in that Merkit camp, surrounded by the corpses of his enemies, Temujin understood something that would reshape history. The men who violated Bert were dead, but what they did to her was permanent. Rape wasn't just violence, it was colonization at the cellular level. It was a form of conquest that outlived empires that couldn't be undone by winning battles or reclaiming territory. It was genetic warfare. And if his enemies understood this, then so would he. But he would do it systematically, scientifically, with the efficiency that would become his signature. By 1206, when the Mongol tribes proclaimed him Genghis Khan universal ruler, he already had the beginnings of a system. The first experiments came during the conquest of the Tangut Kingdom in 1209. While his generals planned military strategy, Genghis Khan deployed something else. Census takers disguised as merchants. They infiltrated Tangut cities months before the armies arrived, counting not fortifications or soldiers, but women. Ages, physical condition, family lineage, social class. They compiled data with the precision of merchants counting inventory. Because that's exactly what it was. Inventory. When the Tangut cities fell, the sorting began for the first time. But it was crude, inefficient. Too many women died in transport. Too many arrived damaged, sick, unable to fulfill their purpose. Genghis Khan treated this like any other logistics problem. He studied the reports, consulted with administrators, revised protocols. Better food for women in transport. Medical attention for the pregnant. Penalties for soldiers who killed or injured women designated for reassignment. This wasn't mercy. This was quality control. Within 2 years, the mortality rate dropped by 40%. The system was working. The caravan reaches a permanent camp 3 days later. Aisha has lost the ability to judge distances. Everything beyond the cart's wooden rails exists in a kind of hazy unreality. But she can see this place is different, not temporary. Structures made of felt and wood, organized in geometric precision. Hundreds of tents arranged in sections, each marked with symbols she doesn't recognize. And the carts, so many carts. Women from everywhere, speaking every language, marked with different symbols, sorted into different sections like goods at a market. They're unloaded by category. The administrator from before, the one who asked if Aisha could read, pulls her toward a specific section. The tents here are slightly larger, better maintained. Women moving between them look healthier, less broken. It takes Aisha several minutes to understand why. These are the educated ones. The translators, the administrators, the scribes. Skills too valuable to waste on mere breeding. She's assigned to a tent with 6 other women. 3 Persian, 2 Chinese, 1 who speaks a language Aisha has never heard. None of them make eye contact when she enters. There's a pattern here, something unspoken. Connection is dangerous. Memory is dangerous. The woman who remembers who she was suffers more than the woman who learns to forget. But that night, after the lamps are extinguished, one of the Persian women whispers in the darkness, "What was your name?" The question breaks something inside Aisha. She hasn't heard her name spoken by another person since reshaped fell. Even thinking it has started to feel like rebellion, like holding on to something she's supposed to surrender. But in the darkness, protected by night and the language of home, she whispers back, "Aisha, daughter of Rashid the calligrapher. I'm Zar, I was a teacher. Poetry, my students used to say. I could make Rumi sound new." Another voice joins, barely audible. "Mariam, my mother was a physician. She was teaching me." They speak for less than 5 minutes before exhaustion claims them. But those 5 minutes are an act of war, a canny rebellion against the machine designed to erase them. They have reminded each other that they existed before this, that they had names, fathers, mothers, purposes, that they were something other than categories and inventory. The Mongols will spend the next decade trying to eliminate precisely these kinds of connections. Between 1219 and 1223, during the Mongol campaigns against the Khwarezmian Empire, tens of thousands of women were not simply casualties of war. They became a part of a vast, organized system. Persian chronicles, Chinese records, and Mongol administrative documents reveal a shocking bureaucratic precision. Women were categorized by age, health, skills, and family background, then transported and reassigned across the empire according to strict protocols. Births were recorded, survival rates monitored, monthly reports sent to Genghis Khan's administrators. This was not random violence. It was industrial-scale reproductive control, a deliberate reshaping of human populations. One fragment from a Persian chronicle recounts a general reporting from Merv, a city of over 1 million, that his men had mishandled the captured women. Genghis Khan's response was chillingly pragmatic. A broken tool serves no purpose. If they cannot understand that these women are resources to be optimized, not toys to be destroyed, then they will be replaced with men who can. In this worldview, women were not people, they were instruments, means to extend an empire beyond the reach of armies and cities. Among them was Aisha, taken from reshaped, a city famed for its poetry and scholarship. 6 months into captivity, she discovered she was pregnant. She knew exactly when it had happened. An officer had visited the tent where educated women were kept, spoke in broken Persian, recited a few lines of poetry, then violated her. Her pregnancy made her more valuable. Better rations, protection, medical attention. But it also meant the child would grow up Mongol, severed from her culture, language, and family. Her survival depended on surrendering a piece of herself. She confessed to Zara, a teacher among the women, that she had considered ending the pregnancy. "I want to live," she admitted. Zara's response reframed survival not as surrender, but as defiance. That's the most stubborn thing you can do. Survive. Remember, make them work for every piece of you they take. Aisha carried the child to term. When he was born in early spring 1222, the Mongol bureaucracy recorded him as another successful output. She named him Rashid, after her father, though she knew his name would not last. 3 years, no more. No less was the period allotted to mothers before their children were taken and assimilated into Mongol families. In those 3 years, Aisha tried to pass on Persian words, songs, stories of reshaped. She knew it was futile, but she persisted. When Rashid was taken, her screams and resistance were meaningless. Within a year, the child would forget her language, and the face of the mother who had whispered her heritage to him would vanish from memory. The system functioned with cold efficiency. Another child erased, another cultural thread severed. Yet the consequences of this system were unexpected and enduring. In 2003, Oxford geneticists published The Genetic Legacy of the Mongols, showing that roughly 16 million men today share a Y chromosome lineage tracing to Mongolia about 1,000 years ago. The timeline and geography correspond to the height of Genghis Khan's empire, implying systematic reproduction, not accidental procreation. This unprecedented spread of genetic material was the result of repeated organized access to women over generations. Some researchers called it biological imperialism, a haunting testament to both the scale of Mongol conquest and the human cost it entailed. Aisha lived another 20 years, bearing 4 more children, each removed at age 3. She became fluent in Mongolian for survival, yet secretly clung to Persian, whispering her name to herself nightly. Her identity, daughter of reshaped, bearer of a lost city's culture, persisted internally, even as externally she adapted to survive. When she died at 43, dysentery, or one of the many illnesses that swept the camps, claimed her. She was buried without ceremony, unmarked, one among countless women who existed in records only as numbers. Yet archaeology reveals the traces these women left. Across Central Asia, graves show women buried outside Mongol tradition, with objects from their homelands: Persian mirrors, Chinese fabrics, small carved stones. One grave in Kazakhstan, dated to the early 13th century, held a Persian mirror and a child-sized Mongol toy. Researchers interpreted this as evidence of dual lives, one imposed, one remembered. The toy may have belonged to a child forcibly taken years before, yet it remained with the mother, a tangible connection to what the empire could not erase. The Mongol administrative machine documented trade, census data, military logistics, even birth rates of captive women, but rarely names. Humanity was inconvenient. Yet erasure is never complete. DNA preserves memory when words and records fail. The women who survived captivity left invisible imprints, songs hummed in secret, words taught to children who would forget, names whispered in darkness. These small acts of resistance were never recorded but persisted in the lived experience of women, an assertion of identity against overwhelming force. Cities like Merv and reshaped were obliterated. Libraries burned, calligraphy and poetry destroyed, artisans and physicians killed. Cultural continuity was shattered. Yet the genetic record of 16 million men today is evidence not of conquest alone, but of the women who survived, carried, and transmitted life under duress. They exist as ghosts in genomes, fragments of culture embedded in biological history, reminders that human agency survives even under the most systematic oppression. The legacy is complex. Nothing restored the lost cities or the lives destroyed. Nothing erased the trauma inflicted on women like Aisha, nor the children taken from them. But the persistence of names in whispered songs, the clinging to heritage in small, hidden acts, the tangible artifacts buried with care, all testify to survival and resistance. They demonstrate an internal sovereignty that could not be catalogued, controlled, or destroyed. Even when external reality was dominated by the machinery of empire, the human spirit left marks impossible to erase. In the end, the Mongol system succeeded at a bureaucratic level. It spread language, faith, and genetic influence across continents, but it failed at the level of memory. The women it tried to erase are still present, not in chronicles, not in official histories, but in DNA, in objects, in fragments of culture preserved in silence. Theirs is a quiet but undeniable defiance, a record of identity, resilience, and humanity that the conquerors could never fully extinguish. They remind us that history is not only written in victory or conquest, but in persistence, memory, and the refusal to vanish entirely. The machine Genghis Khan built was the most efficient system for genetic conquest in human history. But efficiency isn't the same as totality. And somewhere in the gaps, in the spaces between what was documented and what actually happened, women like Aisha held on to threads of themselves that refused to dissolve. They lost. Make no mistake, they lost everything. Their freedom, their children, their names, their cultures, their languages, their lives as they knew them. The machine consumed them as designed. But 8 centuries later, we're still finding them, still discovering their graves, their hidden objects, their DNA, still piecing together the story that was supposed to end with their silence. And every discovery is a small failure of the erasure, a crack in the machine's perfect efficiency. Proof that some things, no matter how deeply buried, eventually surface. Aisha whispered her name in the darkness for 20 years. No one recorded it. No chronicle preserved it. But somewhere, in some way we can't quite measure, that act of defiance echoes forward. Through the woman in Kazakhstan buried with her Persian mirror. Through the genetic studies that reveal what archives tried to hide. Through every archaeological excavation that uncovers evidence of lives that were supposed to vanish without trace. The silence lasted 800 years. But silence, it turns out, isn't permanent. And forgotten isn't the same as gone.